Hello, what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be illustrating the Java loop statement. So we're going to look at the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. So we're going to be using the same algorithm to go ahead and demonstrate those three loops. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be calculating the factorial of a number. So if you remember from mathematics, the notation n factorial represents the factorial of the non-negative int n. The factorial of n is just the product of all the non-negative integers from 1 to n. So there's a couple of examples here. So to calculate the factorial of 4, you just take 1 times 2 times 3 times 4. So what we're going to do in this first example is we're going to write a program that lets the user enter an integer and then uses a for loop to calculate the factorial of the number. And we'll go ahead and display the factorial. So again, we're asking the user to input the number, so we're importing our scanner up above our scanner class. And then on lines 21 through 23 are pretty standard. We're just instantiating a scanner object called input. Then we're prompting the user to enter a whole number, and then we're gathering that input from the user, and we're saving it in an integer value of num. The next statement on line 24, what we're doing, instead of using an int to save the factorial, what we're doing is we're using a long. Just because a long, you can store a lot larger whole number in that, and I'll illustrate that in a couple of minutes why we're using a long versus an int. So within our for loop, our int x equals to 1, basically what that is that's our initializing action. So we're setting x equals to 1. And then our next statement, x is less than or equal to num. What that is our Boolean expression. And then finally we have our update expression, which is just x plus plus. So what that statement's doing is it's adding 1 to x each time we iterate through the loop. And then within the loop, what we're doing is we're just multiplying x by the value that's found in factorial. And then on line 31, we're actually displaying the factorial. So let me just go ahead and run this program. I'll use 7, which should be 5040 for the answer. So I'll compile and run. I'll enter 7, and what we get back is 5040. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and change that long into an int for our factorial. Again, our factorial, the variable, is kind of like our accumulator, so we're just accumulating the factorial in that number. So let me go ahead and compile and run the problem. So I'll enter a number of 15. And it comes back with, at first glance, it looks, hey, that might be the correct answer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our factorial back to a long and rerun the program and run with the same value. And then what it comes back with the true answer for the factorial. So when you're using an int and it reaches its longest highest point and cannot go any further, it will return garbage for you. So basically that's why it's returning that number up above when we ran it, 200-431-0016. So you want to make sure when you're using whole numbers that if your whole numbers are going to be really large, that you use a long instead of an int. For most cases, it'll probably be safe to go ahead and use an integer. So what I'm going to do next is I am just going to copy and paste this information into our visualizer tool, so we can kind of walk through it. So let me just go ahead and open that up, and I'll go ahead and copy and paste that in here, and my command line, my standard in, I'm just going to enter 3. So 1 times 2 times 3, the factorial 3 should be 6. So we'll go ahead and visualize the execution of it. So it's creating our new scanner object. scanner object has been created called input. Our standard in is 3. So we've entered a whole number. It gets saved in our variable called num. And then what we're doing is we're going through our loop. So first time through, we've initialized x equal to 1. Our factorial is initialized to 1. We walk into the loop. Basically, our factorial is still 1, as 1 times 1 is 1. If I click on forward, our x now updates to 2. And then I'll go ahead. We drop down in the line 28. We should be taking 1 times 2, so our factorial should get updated to 2. It does. We go back in our for loop. I'll go ahead and click on it again. X is incremented to 3. So we'll walk through. We'll calculate our factorial. It will be 2 times 3, which should end up being 6. Then the next time through our loop, we'll go ahead and increment x. X is now 4, which is greater than num, so we should drop through, and then we'll go ahead and print out our answer, which is 6. So this kind of just illustrates as you walk through the for loop. So a couple of other things. Let me get back into JGraphs. The one thing I want to show, say for instance, if you mistakenly enter a comma instead of semicolon when you're entering the information for your for loop, you'll run into a compile error. It'll come back and tell you that line 26, it expected a semicolon. So I will just go ahead and delete that, add a semicolon, and say for instance if you actually did forget to add this final where you're actually updating the value of x. So if I go ahead and run the program, I'll enter a number, say 4, and then the program stops. So down below we're running our user program. It'll just sit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control E to end the program. So what we were is we were actually in an infinite loop, so it's kind of hard to see when you're actually using JGraphs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add a little print line, and I will go ahead and save that, and I'll click on the plus, and then let me see here, I forgot to add my semicolon. I'll click on the plus, click on the run button, and I'll enter 4 again. And basically what you see is you just see the dash getting printed out for you. So right now we're in an infinite loop because x never gets incremented, so x is always equal to 1, and our condition x is less than or equal to num is always true, so it never can be false. So that is what an infinite loop looks like. So again, to break out of it, you can enter Control E, and that'll end the program for you. So what we're going to do next is we're going to just look at the same algorithm but using a while loop. So again, the statements through line 24 are the same with our for loop. On 26, we're actually initializing x equals to 1, which in our for loop, we actually did that within the for loop itself. And then we have our condition right here, so we're checking to see if x is less than or equal to num. As long as it is, we'll go ahead and calculate our factorial by taking x times the current value in our factorial. And then our next statement on line 30 is our incrementer. So what we need is we need that statement in there to prevent an infinite loop. So what we're doing here is we're incrementing x by 1. So eventually our loop will end. So let me just go ahead and compile this, and I will run it. I'll enter 15. We should get that same value, a very, very large number for the factorial of 15. So it looks like it's running correctly. I'm going to do the same thing now, as I'm just going to comment out this line of code where we're not actually updating x. and click on a plus and click on the run button. I'll enter 3 here, and it kind of just stops. So down below in our status, running user program. So again, I'll hit Control E to end it. If I go ahead and actually add that same statement in here, systemout.println, to see what actually is going on, I'll go ahead, compile, and run, enter a whole number 3. As you can see, we just keep on getting the dash printed out because we're stuck in an infinite loop, so we're never going to break out of that. So I'll Control E it again. So again, when you're writing a while loop, you must include some type of a way to end the loop. In this case, we're going to end the loop when x is greater than num. So this is a while loop. So both the for loop and the while loop are known as pretest loops, where the test to see if you're going to run the loop is actually done first. So the do while loop is actually a post-test loop. So that's what we're going to look at next. We're going to look at a post-test loop. I'm just going to go ahead and compile and run this to make sure nothing is broken here. That looks like the number. So we'll look at our do while loop. So we're doing the same thing again. Everything up through line 24 is the same. Line 26 is similar to what we did in our do loop. Or in our while loop, we're setting x equal to 1. But basically, the reason why this is a post-test loop is that the loop will always execute at least once. So in this case, our loop will always execute. So what will happen is it'll walk down, it'll calculate the factorial, it'll increment x by 1, and then it'll check to see to make sure that x is less than or equal to num. If it is, then it'll go back and continually execute this loop. Once x is greater than num, then it'll go ahead and drop out. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this loop. Also, I'll enter a value of 7. Again, we get 5040. So what I'm going to do next is I am just going to go ahead and show you the difference between a while and a do while loop. So say for instance, if I entered x equal to 5 on this line, and then I go in and I actually run the number and I enter 4 for my whole number. So what happens here is that it'll go ahead and take 1 times the value that I entered, 1 times x, which is 5. So the loop will actually run. It'll increment x by 1, and then what happens is that the loop will not run again because x is actually greater than num. So the loop executes at least once in this scenario. If I go back into, let me update this back to the original number. So if I go back into my while loop and do the same thing, so I'll set x equals to 5, and then I'll go ahead and run it, and I'll equal 4 for my whole number. Basically what happens is the loop does not execute because it'll walk through x, which is 5, is greater than num, so the loop will not execute. So that shows you the difference between a do while and a while loop. The do while loop will always execute once, while the while loop may never execute, depending upon the Boolean expression and what those variables turn out to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and walk through our while loop. And let me go ahead and copy and paste that in there. into our visualizer tool. Go ahead, drop that in, and I will go ahead and just enter 3 again. We will visualize the execution. So again, our scanner object, I'll just quickly walk through that code. We set x equal to 1 with that statement. That now we're checking to see if x is less than or equal to num. It is, so it'll drop down. It'll calculate the factorial first time through. It'll increment x, so now x is 2. X2 is still less than or equal to num, so it'll drop through. It'll calculate the factorial. It'll increment x to 3. X is now equal to num. It'll drop through, calculate our factorial, increment x to 4. And then now in our check, 4 is not less than or equal to num, so it'll drop through and it'll print out our factorial. And then let me do the same thing for my while loop, do while loop. Edit code, and we'll go ahead and run this. Okay, so let me just speed this up a little bit. Okay, so now we're in our do loop. This will execute at least once because we're not checking that condition. So we calculated the factorial, and then we're adding 1 to x. Now we're doing the condition 2 is less than 3, so we'll calculate our factorial again. We'll increment x. 3 is equal to 3, so we'll walk through our do loop, calculate the factorial. We'll update x to 4. 4 is now, or x is greater than num, which is 3, so we'll drop down and we'll print out our factorial. So this video just kind of illustrated the 3 different types of loops. So if you want to run the loop at least once, you would want to use a do while loop. Usually when you know the number of times you want to flow through a loop, you'll use a for loop, and for other cases you'll use the while loop. So this kind of just walks you through the 3 various loop statements that are available in Java. So we will go ahead and talk to you later.